What happened when an undercover CEO walked into his own museum, only to discover that the quiet janitor everyone overlooked had been secretly starving just to make ends meet? Hello and welcome, amazing listeners. You clearly have a heart for powerful, meaningful stories, and today's one is unforgettable. This isn't just about dusty galleries or sweeping floors. It's about hidden strength, everyday sacrifice, and the moment a leader wakes up to the truth. So sit back and get ready for a journey of empathy, justice, and redemption that proves real legacy isn't built in boardrooms. It's built beside those who carry the weight every day. The hum of the vending machine was the only sound in the museum's dimly lit break room. It was just past midnight, long after the last guest had left, and the gallery lights had gone dark. Victor Langston sat silently in the corner, his janitor's uniform wrinkled and his name tag reading Frank. He kept his eyes low, watching as a man walked in, lean, quiet, mid-40s, with shoulders slouched from fatigue. The man didn't notice Victor. He didn't notice much of anything. He moved automatically, as if his body were doing what his mind had stopped thinking about. He checked over his shoulder, opened the trash bin, and pulled out a half-eaten sandwich, wrapped neatly in wax paper. No hesitation, he sat on an overturned bucket, crouched low, and began to eat, not ravenously but methodically, like someone trying not to be noticed. Victor's chest tightened. He had seen a lot in his decades of leadership, but nothing prepared him for this moment. It wasn't just the act, it was the quiet normalcy of it, the way the man ate with shame masked as routine. This wasn't theft, this wasn't wasteful, this was survival. And it broke something open in Victor that he hadn't felt in a long time. Just 3 weeks ago, he had been in a boardroom in downtown Santa Fe, wearing a tailored suit and talking quarterly metrics. But numbers had started lying to him. Anonymous letters, low morale scores, staff turnover. Something was wrong inside the Westbridge Museum of Contemporary Arts, the institution he had founded with pride, and spreadsheets weren't telling him the truth. So he left his title at the door and stepped into the shadows of his own legacy, disguised as a night janitor, determined to see with his own eyes what had been hidden in plain sight. He hadn't expected answers right away, but now, watching a man eat from a trash can in the institution he built, Victor Langston knew this wasn't just a staffing problem, it was a human one, and it was time to go all in. Victor Langston hadn't always been a man of suits and boardrooms. In his early 20s, he swept gallery floors and stretched canvases for artists who couldn't afford frames. He built the Westbridge Museum of Contemporary Arts from a single rented studio into one of Santa Fe's cultural landmarks, brick by brick, donor by donor, always guided by a belief that art should elevate everyone, especially those who worked behind the scenes to keep it alive. Now in his mid-50s, Victor carried the quiet pride of a man who had once led with purpose, but somewhere along the line, spreadsheets and press kits began speaking louder than people. Over the past year, he had started to notice cracks, anonymous complaints about burnout, whispers of favoritism, reports of skipped breaks and late pay. HR assured him everything was within protocol. His directors cited staff shortages and supply chain issues. On paper, the museum still looked pristine, but Victor knew better. Numbers could be massaged, reports could be spun. What couldn't be faked were the people, their eyes, their tone, their silence. He remembered a phrase his mentor once told him: "When people stop talking, it's not peace, it's surrender." So he made a decision. No press. No production crew, no staged show. Just him, a fake name Frank Ellis, a forged resume claiming he was a recently laid-off groundskeeper, and a temp badge that allowed him to start night shifts in the maintenance crew without raising alarms. He told his board he was taking a 2-week sabbatical. In truth, he was walking back into his legacy from the bottom up. He wanted to feel the floors under his feet, smell the stale break room coffee, hear the staff when they thought no one important was listening. He had no intention of intervening, only observing. But the moment he watched that man eat from the trash, all that changed. This wasn't just about low morale or a few bad managers. It was about dignity, lost, eroded, neglected. And Victor realized with a deep, unsettling clarity, he hadn't just lost sight of his team, he had lost sight of his mission. By day, the Westbridge Museum dazzled. Sunlight poured through its glass atrium, dancing across the marble floors and gilded frames. Tourists snapped selfies beside contemporary installations, and donors strolled through curated exhibits with glasses of wine in hand. It was a picture of cultural refinement, a crown jewel of Santa Fe's artistic scene. But as Victor pushed a mop through the silent halls at night, the museum revealed a different face. One not painted with prestige, but fatigue. Break room walls were stained, janitorial carts had broken wheels, and supply closets looked like afterthoughts. In the stillness, he began noticing things management never talked about. Broken light switches left unrepaired, schedules taped with whiteout corrections, names of staff scratched out without explanation. What disturbed him most wasn't the physical disrepair, but the atmosphere. People moved like shadows, efficient but silent, always watching the clock, never laughing, never lingering. Conversations were clipped, eyes stayed down, and when Diane Rourke, the facilities supervisor, walked by, voices disappeared altogether. She didn't lead, she barked, and no one pushed back. Victor had built this institution to be a sanctuary for creativity and community. But behind the polished walls was a place hollowed out by fear and exhaustion. Staff turnover was higher than he'd ever seen, yet the reports always arrived sugar-coated, personnel pursuing new opportunities. No one mentioned that exit interviews weren't conducted, or that several employees hadn't taken paid time off in over a year. Sierra, the conservator assistant, shared in passing that Diane denied her request for a mental health day, scoffing that art doesn't hang itself. Victor realized then that the real rot wasn't in operations, it was in culture. The systems he trusted had become so focused on optics, they'd stopped seeing the people holding everything up. The Westbridge Museum, once a living tribute to vision and inclusion, had become an engine that chewed through its workers in silence. And he, its founder, had allowed that machine to run unchallenged. The deeper he looked, the more he understood. The museum's outer beauty had become a lie, a distraction. What mattered most had been buried behind locked doors and unread complaints. Caleb Moreno moved like the museum's bones, unseen, uncomplaining, but holding everything up. Victor first noticed him during their second shift together. While other maintenance staff trickled in, yawning and distracted, Caleb was already at work, emptying bins and replacing filters with a rhythm that suggested he didn't need supervision because he'd never stopped working. He rarely spoke unless addressed, and when he did, his words were measured, almost apologetic, like a man afraid of taking up too much space. He didn't rest during breaks, didn't eat in the lounge. Instead, Victor often saw him retreat to a back hallway with a rag in one hand and tools in the other, always fixing something no one had asked him to fix. He'd sweep corners no one walked through and polish plaques most guests never read. At first, Victor chalked it up to pride in his work, but as the days wore on, it became clear Caleb's silence wasn't just personality, it was survival. When someone knocked over a display stand, Caleb fixed it before anyone noticed. When Diane snapped at the new porter for missing a spill, it was Caleb who cleaned it up without protest. Victor watched all of this in stunned silence. It wasn't just that Caleb did more than he was paid for. It was that no one even noticed he was doing it. He existed in the blind spot of the museum's culture, too quiet to be praised, too essential to be missed, too humble to ask for help. It was that same silence that surrounded him the night Victor saw him eat from the trash. Not desperation, not shame. Just weary acceptance. Victor felt a pang he couldn't shake. In a world that rewarded noise and titles, Caleb's quiet excellence was invisible. But Victor saw it now, and he couldn't unsee it. Caleb wasn't just another worker, he was the soul of the place. The kind of man who showed up not because he was told to, but because it mattered. And in a system built to ignore people like him, Caleb's quiet persistence was nothing short of heroic. It started with a granola bar. Victor noticed Sierra Nguyen slip it into Caleb's jacket pocket during a late-night shift change, her gestures subtle, her eyes avoiding contact. That small act, so quiet it might have gone unnoticed, opened a door. Later that evening, while restocking supplies, Victor struck up a conversation with Sierra under the pretense of asking how to clean the protective glass panels in Gallery B. She hesitated at first, but something in his tone, genuine curiosity rather than protocol, made her pause. Then she sighed. "He's got a kid," she said softly, nodding toward Caleb. "7, I think. His sister helps watch him. He walks here every night. Can't afford a car since his last job fell through." Victor stayed silent, letting her fill in the blanks. "He used to be an electrician, lost everything during the pandemic. Took this job without complaint. He's the first to arrive, last to leave, and Diane still treats him like a ghost." That was the first ripple. Over the next few days, Victor listened. A porter mentioned that HR never returned calls. A security guard whispered that Diane had changed the schedule without notice, again. Even the museum cafe cashier said Caleb had turned down free staff meals, claiming he'd already eaten. "He always gives his to someone else," she said. "We thought he was just generous." But Victor knew now it wasn't generosity. It was self-denial dressed as kindness. Beneath the surface, a whisper network existed. Not gossip, but quiet truths passed hand to hand like smuggled letters. Employees didn't trust the system anymore, but they still cared about each other, about the work, about keeping things going. The museum's staff weren't lazy or disengaged. They were survivors, moving carefully through an environment that had stopped seeing them. Victor realized the heartbreaking irony. He had built this place to celebrate expression, yet his employees had been forced into silence. Their resilience didn't need louder voices. It needed listening ears. And now that he'd heard them, he couldn't walk away. Victor waited until the museum was empty and the final security sweep had passed before approaching Caleb. It was just past midnight, the halls dark, the air humming with quiet. Caleb was restocking cleaning supplies in the back storage room, crouched low, organizing without being asked. Victor stepped inside, heart pounding, unsure how to begin. "Caleb," he said softly. The man looked up, startled. "Got a second?" Caleb straightened, wiping his hands on a rag. "Sure. What's up?" Victor hesitated, then reached into his pocket and pulled out his real ID badge, the one that read, "Victor Langston, Executive Director." He held it out without a word. Caleb stared at it, then at Victor. His jaw clenched, but he didn't speak. "I didn't come here to trick you," Victor said gently. "I came to see what I'd stopped seeing." Caleb leaned back against the shelf, arms crossed. "So, what now? I get written up for dumpster diving?" His voice held no fear, just tired resignation. "No," Victor said. "You get thanked. You get heard." Silence stretched between them. Then Caleb's voice cracked just a little. "I wasn't stealing. I just hadn't eaten in 2 days. Rent's overdue. My sister's watching my kid. I didn't want to ask for help. I thought maybe if I just kept working hard enough." His voice trailed off. Victor looked down, ashamed, not of Caleb, but of himself. "You shouldn't have to survive in the shadows of the place you help hold up," he said, "and I'm sorry you've had to." Caleb stared at him for a long moment, then exhaled. "Most people in charge don't care what happens in rooms like this," he said, glancing around the supply closet. "They care about donors, reviews, front pages, not janitors." Victor nodded slowly. "I used to care. Somewhere along the way I stopped paying attention, but you've changed that." He paused. "I want to fix what's broken here, Caleb. Not just this location, everywhere. But I can't do it alone. I need your help." Caleb looked stunned. "Me?" "You've already been leading," Victor replied. "Now it's time you had the title to match." Caleb didn't smile. Not yet. But his eyes, for the first time in a long time, didn't look away. The next morning, the air in the museum buzzed with unease. Staff had been called in early for an all-hands meeting. No details, just a note posted outside the break room. Mandatory, 8:00 IEMM, front gallery. Most assumed it was another routine policy update or perhaps a donor event setup. But when Victor Langston stepped in front of the gathered employees, no longer in his janitor's clothes but wearing a simple navy sweater and his official badge clipped to his chest, the room fell silent. He didn't stand behind a podium, he didn't clear his throat or read from a script. He just looked around the room, at Caleb, at Sierra, at the tired faces that had become his team during those quiet late-night shifts, and began. "I've worked beside you for the past 2 weeks," he said. "You knew me as Frank, but my name is Victor Langston, and I'm not here to make a speech. I'm here to make things right." Gasps filled the space. Eyes widened. A few people exchanged looks, unsure whether to feel betrayed or relieved. Then Victor turned to Diane Rourke, who stood stiffly near the back, arms crossed. "Diane," he said, voice steady, "do you know how many complaints your team has filed in the last year?" She blinked. I don't think it's that many. 13, 6 related to break violations, 4 about verbal mistreatment, 3 about schedule tampering, all confirmed, all ignored. Diane's lips parted, but no defense came. Effective immediately, you're relieved of your duties. Gasps turned into murmurs. One of the docents let out an audible, "Finally." Diane's mouth opened, but Victor raised a hand. "HR will contact you. You may go." After a stunned pause, she turned and walked out, the sound of her heels echoing like a gavel drop. Victor turned back to the group. "This isn't just about one person. This is about the culture we've allowed to grow here. That ends today." He outlined the new changes: 2 guaranteed breaks per shift, a hardship meal program, an anonymous reporting system, and wage evaluations across the board. But the biggest announcement came last. Caleb Moreno has been appointed interim facilities lead. He's earned it through integrity, endurance, and quiet leadership. As the room erupted into applause, soft at first, then louder, Caleb stood frozen. Victor met his gaze and nodded. This was no longer a secret mission. This was the beginning of accountability. The change didn't come with fanfare. It arrived quietly, like a long overdue sunrise. In the days following the staff meeting, the Westbridge Museum began to shift, not in dramatic bursts, but in small human moments. Staff who once moved in silence now chatted during morning walkthroughs. The break room, once avoided, now smelled of fresh coffee and hosted birthday cards taped to the fridge. Caleb, now in a clean uniform with facilities lead stitched above his heart, walked the halls with a new posture. Still quiet, still humble, but no longer invisible. He started leading short huddles before each evening shift, asking his team what they needed and checking in on their well-being before the floors ever got swept. Sierra organized a staff mural in the loading dock hallway, a vibrant painting of intertwined hands lifting a cracked sculpture. At the bottom corner, Caleb's son, Mateo, had added a simple phrase in marker: "Thank you for seeing my dad." The museum, once a beautiful facade covering rot, now reflected something deeper: care. Staff began offering input on scheduling and layout changes. Managers listened. The new hardship meal policy went into effect without red tape, and the kitchen quietly left sealed lunches in the fridge for anyone who needed them. Nobody asked questions, nobody judged. Victor, true to his word, didn't disappear. He showed up weekly, not to supervise but to observe and connect. He laughed with docents, asked the cafe barista how her classes were going, and once spent an afternoon helping Caleb repair a broken exhibit light just because he missed using his hands. The transformation wasn't about policies, it was about dignity, and for the first time in a long while, the people behind the art felt like they mattered just as much as the art itself. 3 weeks later, Victor sat alone in the museum's west wing, in the same gallery where he had once dreamed up the idea of Westbridge. Sunlight filtered through the high windows, casting soft light across a newly installed exhibit, a series of staff portraits painted by a local artist, celebrating the people who kept the museum running. Caleb's portrait hung near the center. No plaque, no fanfare, just a quiet depiction of a man in uniform standing beside a mop, his expression steady and proud. Victor sipped his coffee slowly, reflecting on how close he'd come to losing the soul of the place he'd built. It hadn't been the art, the donors, or the acclaim that made the Westbridge Museum matter. It had been the people who showed up every day and gave more than they had to spare. A quiet knock broke his thoughts. A young intern stepped in and handed him a small envelope with no return name, just Caleb's handwriting. Inside was a $10 bill and a short note. "For the coffee you never let me buy. You gave me more than a title. You gave me my name back." Victor smiled, feeling the weight of the moment settle in his chest. Legacy, he realized, wasn't about what hung on the walls. It was about who stood behind them. The janitor no one saw had become the face of something greater. A museum not just filled with art, but rebuilt on empathy, resilience, and restored humanity. And Victor, once lost in spreadsheets and silence, had finally come home to his purpose. The story of Victor Langston and Caleb Moreno teaches a powerful lesson. True leadership begins with seeing the unseen. In a world where performance is often measured by numbers and appearances, this story reminds us that dignity, empathy, and human connection are the real cornerstones of any lasting legacy. Victor built a museum to celebrate beauty, but he lost sight of the beauty in his own people, the janitors, assistants, and quiet workers who gave everything without being noticed. It took going undercover, stripping away his title, to rediscover the heart of his institution. Caleb's silent strength and unwavering work ethic revealed the cracks in a system that had forgotten compassion. And in recognizing Caleb, not just with a title, but with respect, Victor began healing more than just a workplace. He restored dignity. The lesson is clear. Listen to the quiet voices, pay attention to the ones who carry the weight, and never assume silence means everything is fine. When leaders lead with humility, and when organizations prioritize people over performance, change doesn't just happen, it lasts. In the end, legacy isn't built by those at the top, but by how they lift up those who carry everything from below.